Hello, class. This is a recording of problems 5 and 6 from chapter 11. Just walking through another example of analysis from this chapter. And then at the very end of this, I will also record problem number 4. So if anyone wants to optionally do that in the old version of the sample problems that were posted, you're welcome to do so. It is a duplicate, or it teaches the same stuff that we already did in class, but it might be valuable to have that video out there. So I will go ahead and record that also. So for problem number 5, we're a cost accountant for Porch Perfection, and they are manufacturing porch swings. So they're giving us this data. So looking over here, we've got variable overhead amounts that are calculated. They give us actual, flexible, and what was allocated. So this is not the static budget. This is what was actually allocated based on what their allocation rate was. So keep that in mind. And then across for flexible budget, they've got $350,000 for fixed overhead. That's what they allocated. And then they had an actual cost of $355,000. Looking down here at the detail they give us for the variable overhead. So they're saying that their base of allocation is machine hours, and then their fixed overhead is based on the number of units. Okay. So they've got a budgeted number of output units, which is 1,400, and budgeted machine hours per unit. So from this, we can calculate our budgeted machine hours, right? I'm just gonna, let's see, budgeted number of units. Whoa, and I spelled units wrong, typo there. There we go. So 1,400 units. Budgeted machine hours per unit is 1.5. So we can say then that our total budgeted machine hours is going to be the budgeted number of units times the budgeted machine hours per unit of 1.5. So that gets us 2,100 budgeted machine hours there. So we can go ahead and enter that down here. Now, budgeted fixed manufacturing overhead costs per swing. All right, well, if they've got a flexible fixed, let's see, so the variable overhead was 92,000 for costs. Let's see here. So we want to take our flexible budget overhead here to calculate this. Which is the 350,000, and we're just going to divide that by the budgeted number of units, which is 1,400 per unit. So, and how we know that is because they said here, by the way, that our fixed overhead was budgeted based on number of units. And let's see, we allocated actually, so our actual would have been our actual number of units would be the same number of units here, 1,400, because what we allocated was the same as the flexible budget. So we're going to assume that if we've got our budgeted number of units as 1,400, that we are going to divide by that. Oops, and I think that should be 350,000. There we go. So that gets us a overhead cost per swing of 200 for the fixed, okay? Or per unit. Okay, so now they're asking us to do our budgeted variable manufacturing overhead costs per swing. So normally what we would do to calculate this, right? So our budgeted variable manufacturing overhead per swing. Normally what we would do is we would take our static budgeted, or our static budget variable overhead costs, right? Oh my gosh, I can't type. And we would divide that by our budgeted output. But they didn't provide us the static amount here. So that is trickier, but let's see here. So looking at our flexible number here. Okay, wait. So they gave us a dollar amount here, right, of 92,000. So looking at this, if our static budget variable costs for 92,000 are the same as our flexible budget, that actually tells us that our flexible budget and our static budget have the same number of units here. So that must mean that our actual manufacturing amount was the 1,400 also. Okay, so we're going to actually take then the variable dollar amount that they gave us here, right? And we're going to divide that by the budgeted machine hours, because we're trying to get variable overhead costs per machine hour. So if we know that our budgeted machine hours are the 2,100, we're going to divide that by the budgeted machine hours. All right, so then let's see here. So that gets us to, and they are having us round to 2 decimal places. Okay, so 4381, right? Now let's see. So how many actual swings did we produce? Well, I just figured that out because we mentioned here, by the way, that if the static budgeted or static variable amount is equal to the flexible variable amount, then we can tell that our flexible amount was the same amount of output units, the 1,400. So we were looking at that. We did the same thing there. If that's not the case, we would have, like in this case, we can back into that number because they didn't tell us how many units there were for actual and flexible. Normally, we would need to know what that number is, right? They would have to give it to us. But because in this case, the static and the flexible are the same, we can tell that it has to be 1,400. Otherwise, the flexible budget would have been higher. It would have been like based on this standard amount, right? So let's see, budgeted number of machine hours allocated for actual number of swings produced. Okay, so if we have budgeted output units, so again, we're going to take our budgeted output units. We had 1,400 times the 1.5 per unit, which was the 2,100 we already calculated. Since the actual number of swings was produced, it's still going to be the same. Yeah, so if the actual amount was different from the budgeted amount, then we would take whatever the actual amount was times the 1.5, and that would get us the flexible budgeted amount. Now, the actual number of machine hours per swing, let's see here. So they told us 2,170, and since we know that so the actual number of machine hours was 2,170, and the actual number of swings produced was the 1,400. So that would get us the actual machine hours per swings produced. So that gets us to 1.55. Okay. All right, so that's actually it for number 5. And then for problem number 6 here, this one is actually an analysis question, so there's not as much to this one. We've got Monica Navarro, CFO of XYZ company. They asked her cost accounting team to prepare a visualization to summarize the trends in overhead costs over time. That should be a space in there, huh? typo there. The team has prepared the following charts to display budgeted and actual units produced and the overhead variances for the past 4 years. So they want you to look at this dashboard and describe basically what we're seeing like. So essentially read a graph and describe it. So we'll probably also talk about this briefly in class just because this is a pretty quick question to do, but let's see. So our variable overhead efficiency variance is kind of all over the place, right? Like it's, so our efficiency variance was a negative number for the first couple of years and for the last year, and a positive number for the third one. So, I mean, that's how efficiently are we using our let's see, do we have any information on what our allocation bases are? Let's see here. Doesn't really say. So whatever our allocation base is, it's unfavorable for years 1, 2, and 4, right? So they're putting unfavorable on the bottom, favorable on the top. So we need to be more efficient at using our stuff is basically what that's telling us. So this is, interpreting what do these variances mean? So the fixed overhead flexible budget variance is the blue one. So based on the number of units that we actually produced, our fixed overhead looks like unfavorable for all 4 years, but it's trending better over time. It's getting closer to our goal, right? The green one, our production volume variance. So we had favorable production volume variance the first couple of years and then a negative in the third year. Notice that our production volume variance is inverse with our variable overhead efficiency variance there in all 4 years. Interesting. And then our variable overhead spending variance was actually like quite high, or actually favorable though. So because they're putting favorable on top, right? So, oh, nope, they're saying that's a dollar amount. Sorry. So the variance is high on that one. So they're saying positive number high. Yeah, so it's an expense. So we were quite over our spending costs in all 4 years. So lots of interesting points there. And then we also see as far as like units produced, we were trending upward the last 3 years, right? And our budget timing lagged a little bit before we realized that. So we were on budget basically in years 2 and 4, and then we had an unexpectedly higher number in year 3. So we ramped up our budget for year 4 to make that match. All right, I'm going to move on to that last problem, number 4. Okay, and I had actually removed that problem 4 totally out of the assignment. So I made an optional additional problem assignment out there if anyone wants to walk through this, just to get a little more understanding on this topic, but totally optional. So this will be here for you if you want it, but you won't get graded on it. Just another example to look through. So we've got Power Wheels. They produce electric toy vehicles for children that look like real cars and trucks. And they gave us both the actual and the static budget here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a little worksheet here. And I'm going to put in here the actual and the static budget and what we know from each of these. And we're just going to kind of walk through the numbers that we have so that we can get an idea of what our flexible budget looks like, et cetera, and how we would formulate that, right? So, okay, so we're going to have units produced, make this a little wider so I've got a little more room there. Units produced, machine hours per unit, and then I'll wait on the other two here. So first of all, let's just plug this in 220,000 units produced with 1.4 machine hours per unit. And then for the static budget, we had 200,000 at 1.5. So we're going to eventually at some point here want to know like how many total machine hours did we have? So let's just go ahead and multiply this out. Right, so just multiplying this times that. And then while we're at it, let's fill in the flexible budget also. Okay, so the flexible budget is going to be based on the actual number of units. I don't know why that, oh, because I did it. Okay, hold on, let me do that as a formula. Equals B6 times B7. There we go, then I can copy that over. That's why we don't hard code things in Excel, folks. Okay, and then, but it's also going to be based on, so actual number of units of production ramped up at our standard number of machine costs here, right? So notice these two match each other, okay? All right, so that gets our total machine hours. So actual total and flexible budget total here now we've figured out here, as well as our static budget amount. So now here we've got variable overhead. Let's look at this. I'm just going to put VOH. All right. So our variable overhead total here was 585,200, and over here was 600,000. Okay. So we've got that. And then, so now we're going to look here. So we've got variable overhead. If this is being allocated based on machine hour, let's figure out what our variable overhead per machine hour is going to be. Okay, so let's take variable overhead, be 10 divided by our total machine hours in that row. And that's going to get us 1.9. Okay, and then let's do the same over here, because then we can figure out what rate they were using here. So it looks like that's even. I'm going to put all of this out to 2 digits here just to make sure. Okay, let's do that. All right, so we've got everything easy to read here now. Okay, so this one, again, this is going to be calculated at the same rate here. So I'm just going to put equals F11 here, right? So it's exactly the same. And then we're going to ramp that up, right? Times our total machine hours, right? So if this is this divided by that, then we can take this and multiply it times that to get this, right? So equals D11 times D8. So that gets us 660,000 for expected variable overhead, right? So variable overhead per machine hour times the number of machine hours to get rid of that divisor there, right? Will get us the variable overhead. So we're just reversing through algebra here. Okay. So we've got that figured out here. And then so our variable overhead per unit then would be to take that variable overhead and divide it by the number of units. So that gets us 266 there. So again, variable overhead divided by the number of units. And again, we see here, if you do this, if you've done everything up here right, like if your variable overhead is calculated right, then when you calculate this variable overhead per unit, it should be the same between the flexible and static, because all of your standards are the same, right? Your rates are the same between your flexible and your static budget. It's just that the the amounts you calculate for dollar values will be ramped up for the larger or smaller volume if the volume is smaller. So for your adjusted volume there. Okay, so then let's look at fixed overhead. Let's see here. So 62,000 and 66,000. So fixed overhead here, by the way, that's going to be expected to stay the same. So that one should be matched here, right? I'm going to just put equals that. And here I'm going to put equal, equal, and up here I'm going to put equal there, right? So anything where something is the same between the two columns, I'm going to put an equal sign here so that you know. Oops, there we go. And that one too. There we go. So then you know, like if you can just pull that number over, right? Let's see. So now we want to do our fixed overhead per hour. We're going to figure that out. Or I'll put per machine hour, right? We're going to calculate that divided by the number of machine hours. So B14 divided by B8. That gets us 0.2. So across the board then, this one will change because we have the same amount, but we have different expected machine hours because of the different production levels, right? So this one is not going to be, this rate will not be equal, just the dollar amount will be equal. And then the fixed overhead, I'm just put fixed overhead per unit, right? So the earlier one is per hour, this one's per unit. So again, taking the fixed overhead dollar amount divided by the number of units. So this is kind of a review of some of the stuff we did in our earlier chapters here, but I'm just walking through this because it's a lot of calculations and we want to remember these relationships here, right? All right, so our total overhead then is going to be the variable overhead plus the fixed overhead, right? So B10 plus B14. All right, and then we want to also, let's see here. So we want to do then also, the last thing we're going to want to know here is going to be our fixed overhead that's allocated, right? How much are we allocating based on our number of units, right? So we're going to take our actual units produced here in B6, and we're going to multiply it times our static budget fixed overhead rate per unit, which we calculated over there, which is F16. So taking the actual number of units times the budgeted rate that we came up with, right? So ultimately, by the way, so this is our total fixed overhead that we're charging out per unit here, right? Just want to call that out for future purposes. When we're allocating it, that's the rate that we're doing, okay? I'm just going to highlight that because that's important here. Okay, just since that one, I suppose I could have just put the formula down here, huh? Oops, except yeah, it's doing a relative reference there. So anyway, I just wanted to call out that that's where that came from. But getting back to our problem then, right? So we did, let's see, so we want to know our variable overhead flexible budget variance. Okay, so looking at variable overhead here, we're going to look at the difference between, so the flexible budget variance is our difference between our actual and flexible. Oops, variance. There we go. So equals B10 minus B10. So that's going to get us minus 74,800. And our next one here, they're asking for variable overhead spending variances. Okay, so, oh, let me pull up here really quick. 1 second here. I'm going to pause so I can pull this up for you. Okay, so here's the handout I wanted to pull up here for you, right? So they're asking us here for the variable overhead spending variances, right? So when we're looking at that, spending variance, remember, is going to be your actual quantity times your actual price minus your standard price, okay? So, so variable overhead spending variance equals our actual quantity times the actual price minus the standard price. Okay. Oh, put a little thing in there so it knows that that's writing. All right. So to calculate this then, so our actual quantity, this, by the way, because we're looking at this based on the total machine hours. Okay. So for our actual quantity here, okay, so we're going to take the machine hours, total machine hours here, and we're going to multiply that times our variable overhead per machine hour here, okay? Minus the $2, okay? So that gets us minus 30,800. By the way, looking at this, right? So if we budget an amount and we have less than that amount, right? So our actual variable overhead was less than our flexible. So that is going to be favorable, right? And same thing here, our overhead spending variance, if we incur less than expected, that's favorable. Okay, so we've got that one now. Next, we're going to look at our variable overhead efficiency variance. So let me grab this handout back here, right? So our efficiency variance is going to be our standard price times the actual quantity minus the standard quantity, okay? So variable overhead efficiency variance equals the standard price times the actual quantity minus the standard quantity, right? So how much of that variance is due to differences in quantity that were used, right? So our standard price then, we're going to this same standard price we used up here, right? I'm going to copy this over here, by the way, just so that if you need that formula there, you can see it. So our standard price was $2. So we're going to do 2 times, and then we're going to multiply that times the 308,000, which is our actual quantity of machine hours, minus the budgeted amount, which was the 330,000 there. So that gets us minus 44,000. And I'll put that formula over here also. And again, that's favorable. Okay. So the next thing, fixed overhead spending variance. So that's a super easy one, right? We just take the difference between the spending here. So B14 minus D14. So that's minus 4,000. Also favorable. And then the last one is our production volume variance. Okay, so let's see. Do I have that on my spreadsheet here for you? Hold on. I thought I did. Where did I have it? Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, so going back here, production. So budgeted fixed overhead minus our applied fixed overhead, both of which we already calculated. So production volume variance. Oops, I always like reflexively type that. So budgeted fixed overhead minus applied fixed overhead. So our budgeted fixed overhead was the 66,000 minus the amount that we applied, or let's see here. Hold on a second here. Hold on a second here. Let me just look at what I did there. That was the 220. Yeah. Okay. Yep. So sorry, budgeted, we had, 66,000 minus the applied amount of 72,600, which we already calculated. All right. Now, so this, by the way, is not on the worksheet, but budgeted minus the actual production, right? Times the fixed overhead per unit. Okay, so putting that out there. That would be one you might want to actually add to your formula sheet there, that budgeted minus actual. In fact, I'm going to write that on mine just so I remember that for next time to call that out in class. All right, so that should get you everywhere you need to go for this chapter. Let me know if you have any questions.